You're listening to Streetside, a Street Medicine Institute podcast.
Hello, and welcome to Streetside, conversations at the intersection of healthcare, homelessness, and humanity. It is a great joy today that we have Corinne Feldman, physician assistant from Los Angeles, with us. Corinne, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah. We typically ask our guests to introduce themselves. So I'm going to ask you to kind of tell us your path into becoming a PA and getting involved in street medicine. I know you've been doing it, I think, for 20 years, and then what your current role is.
Yeah, I was going to say, how long do you have? It's definitely been a journey. I mean, kind of the abbreviated version is I'm a physician assistant. I've been a PA for almost 21 years and working with people who are experiencing homelessness since about 2007, which started as, shelter-based clinics and, just kind of realizing that in shelters, sometimes people stop coming back and we know they didn't get housed. And so, frankly, like the journey for street medicine has really been about curiosity, and not just sort of accepting that people just, they must have gotten housed or they stopped coming back to the clinic for some really, wholesome reason. And so just that curiosity and concern for patients led us outside to find that there were whole communities of people who were living without homes. And so that was back on the East Coast in Pennsylvania, in Allentown and Bethlehem and Easton, kind of the Lehigh Valley area, and lived there until 2018 when I moved here to Los Angeles with my husband, Brett, to start the street medicine program at University of Southern California. And so my role here has kind of evolved over time, as is true with lots of street medicine folks, right? You do lots of things to try to be able to do the one thing you really love the most. And so at USC, I'm the director of workforce development and education, which is a lot of words just to say I get to teach about street medicine. Most of the time, that's what I'm doing. I still see patients every week and then spend the rest of the time developing ways to teach other people how to do this work, how to get started or how to grow.
Fantastic. And does that mean before 2018, there was not street medicine in Los Angeles?
Oh, yeah. So this was one of the exploration things when this kind of popped up on the radar as a possible place to move to. We started to realize that we had never met anybody from Los Angeles doing street medicine. And that was another part of the curiosity of how can you have really the epicenter of unsheltered homelessness in the United States, but no primary care being provided on the street. And so it turns out there was another organization here in LA in the Venice kind of Santa Monica area that was doing primary care on the street in all of the ways that we may think of street medicine. Go to the people, go where they go, bring all the stuff with you, do as much as you can on the street corner. So there was one other team. And outside of that, it was largely humongous outreach efforts, which continue today from social service organizations, but not street medicine.
What are the number of homeless individuals in Los Angeles?
Just over 70,000 in the county of Los Angeles. Yeah.
Okay. As an outsider, my perspective is you have a massive program. Tell us about your work. How many employees do you have? Clinicians, vehicles? Give us the scale.
Yeah, the stuff and the things. So USC Street Medicine has about 50 employees, and we started in 2018, as I had mentioned. And I think it's important to remember that every street medicine team starts small. So even though we have 50 employees now and, different arms and branches, which I'll explain in a moment, what we really started with was a handful of people, most of which weren't even working in street medicine full time. And so it started from a few, and we were able to grow over time. We have 4 arms at USC Street Medicine. The first is the clinical arm, right, which is mostly what you're describing. We have 5 full-time street medicine teams that is made of, somebody who can prescribe, 2 CHWs, some type of nursing support. We're about to launch our 6th. Actually, we just launched our 6th team, number 6, it's hard to say, just a couple of weeks ago. And then we have, staffing where we don't have enough for each team. For example, social workers, we have a street psychiatrist, an HIV specialist, folks that are kind of in a more shared capacity. Then we have workforce development and education, which is the part that I oversee. We have a policy and advocacy arm, which works on policy and legislation, really from hyperlocal all the way up through federal pieces. And that houses our California Street Medicine Collaborative, which has over 1,000 members and is kind of our state voice for street medicine. And so I think one of the things that's been unique here is how do you build a model that has, not just a 3-legged stool, but sort of this 4-legged stool that learns from each other constantly. And that's really been such a treasure being here.
Very robust program, and you have things that most programs dream of, the specialists in psychiatry and HIV, etc. You work a lot in workplace development. Tell us about that. Tell us more. What does that mean? Are you teaching courses at USC? Are you bringing people out for field experiences? What does it look like?
Yeah, kind of all the above. So I sort of have two buckets that I think about. I have the bucket where anybody who's still in their educational journey falls into. So that's undergrad students all the way up through HIV fellows or PhD candidates. And so we have a home for them. We have coursework and we have rotations and all of those sorts of things. And then we have, what do you do with the folks who are working in an organization that's decided to launch street medicine? Or there's a group that's been doing street medicine maybe once a month, and now they want to learn how to do it as a full-time job and implement billing and all of these things. And so we almost act as like coaches, a lot of technical assistance, whether it's through the Street Medicine Institute, who sometimes will ask for some help with technical assistance for teams, or people who reach directly out to us. We also do ride-alongs sometimes to get conversations to move, or for people to truly understand what it is that we're talking about, bringing folks out, helping them kind of understand what they're seeing, and then either bringing that back home and tweaking it or whatever the case might be. So I think those are the real tangible, proximal kind of things. But I also think in a much bigger picture, which is how do we sustain a workforce? How do we train a workforce that's not just ready to do this work, but ready to do this work for the next 10 or 20 or 30 years and really start to move the needle on what street medicine looks like in the United States?
Thank you for what you're doing. We need that, right? If every medical PA and nursing school had one required experience related to homelessness, what would you want it to be?
Oh man, this is a great question, because one of the things I didn't mention is I've been involved in higher medical education for a long time. I used to oversee the curriculum for the PA program here at USC, and have been teaching for a long time. And so like educational theory really matters to me. I'm like a super dork when it comes to that, and I embrace it fully. But I think you need a sustained effort. I really feel like one of the things that's happened over the years is homelessness has become, another special population that we talk once about in school, and then you move on to the rest of the population. And I think it's frankly really the wrong approach for all special population teaching and higher medical education, if I could be so bold. I think there's a much better way of doing it that is far more integrative. But I think if I had to start somewhere, it's with anything that humanizes the people that we're taking care of. Because one of the biggest gaps in the care is that we have accepted that this is a person or a group of people that we don't understand. We haven't had the same experiences, or however we justify the detachment. And it's this like rational detachment that we think we're justifying. And in reality, we are making everything worse. And so, if you're in a nursing school somewhere and you don't know about any of this stuff, trust me, you can come up with lessons and I will help you that just purely humanizes the people that we take care of and that we get to be in their lives. That's a great place to start.
Yeah, thank you for that, because othering is the enemy, right? And we tend to other, we other all the time. And recognizing the common humanity at the basis of street medicine is the kernel of truth, I think, that underlies the bedrock of everything we do, right? That trusting relationship and letting it be patient-led.
Yeah. And I mean, I just think somewhere along the way, every clinician decided they wanted to go to work and have 15-minute time slots where a person has one complaint at a time. Their life is never a mess like yours is. They're always on time, unlike you, right? Like that's the perfect day is, 50% of the people don't show up, and the ones that do don't have many problems. And instead, we should really be framing humans as complex puzzles and be excited about getting to be part of that puzzle rather than it being a drag.
And walking into the chaos and
absolutely
and enjoying it. Right?
Yes, they do call me the chaos queen sometimes. I'm assuming it's a compliment.
Right. Well, are you trying to bring order out of the chaos, or are you adding to it?
I mean, who can really say for sure?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I don't know if I've shared this on the podcast before, but there was a brilliant essay by Albert Camus about Sisyphus, in Greek mythology, pushing the boulder up the mountain and it keeps falling back. And Camus wrote that we have to picture Sisyphus as happy doing that, right? So
Right.
that's what we're relegated to doing in street medicine, is pushing boulders and just
Finding
smiling and laughing
happiness.
through it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Choose
Yeah.
choose joy, choose hope. One
Yeah.
of the lectures that I give, the last slide, is always a reminder that hope is the rebellion, right? And how simple is that?
That sounds like the title of your book.
Maybe, I don't know. We'll see.
Hope is the rebellion. I love it. Rest is resistance too. That's a whole theme. Yeah, I want to just share with you briefly. I got my NP degree from USC in 1992. So,
All right,
and
fight on.
I trained at LA County in the
I
emergency
didn't
room.
realize that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so LA is near and dear to my heart. Live near MacArthur Park, the world's largest open air pharmacy.
Yes. Yes.
Anyway,
We were just
I want
there
to,
this weekend.
yeah, I want to add, go a little deeper on the topic. You have a wealth of experience working with victims of domestic violence and people that have been trafficked. I'd like to kind of dig into that. We have not covered that on this podcast. It's a glaring hole in our content, and I'd like you to kind of guide us on your experience with that population, and what are your interventions? How do you approach trafficking and domestic violence in Los Angeles? Sorry, big question.
Yeah. Listen, this is part of the reality of doing street medicine anywhere. I mean, yes, Los Angeles, but every city I've traveled to, every street medicine provider that I've talked to has shared the same kind of unsettled emotions that come with witnessing relationships where, frankly, a lot of times you're not exactly sure what's happening. I always have found that one of the superpowers of street medicine is your invitation to be in the middle of people's lives in this very raw and very organic way. There's no, it's just unlike any clinic setting you could possibly ever produce. And I feel like that's saying something. I've worked on mobile units. I've worked, inpatient, outpatient, step down units, nursing homes, like all of these different spaces that are home-esque in some ways, shelters, but it's not the same as being on the street. And so I think we, one, have to recognize what a privilege that is to be intimately aware of people's relationships and witness them. I also think it's a superpower because street medicine teams are experts at having reasons to come back many times in a week over week. And no one really becomes suspicious of that because there's a lot of outstanding medical and social things that we could be addressing. So I think where teams and individual providers can often feel powerless, we have to recognize where there is power. And that is by being present. It is by having relationships often with all of the players in a very complicated web of social support, sometimes of coercion, sometimes not, and really being able to be a person who can be trusted with the real stuff of what's going on. So I think I would not ever want to be blinded to that anymore in the ways in which I felt that I was in all of those other settings that I practiced in, where even though I was spending lots of time with people, it was just in a different environment. I think the second thing is that we have to really check our own assumptions about how intimate partner violence happens, who is hurting whom and for what reasons and under what circumstances. It's never, in any way, shape, or form an acceptable way, right, to manage one's feelings and stressors and things like that. So I'm not endorsing it in any way, but we have an opportunity to really see what those stressors are and what those pressures are and how people cope, and be present to help them find other ways of coping besides taking out that frustration on one another. We do a lot of coaching in terms of communication in violence prevention within encampments and within partnerships, right? This is all part of primary care, right? Every time you're screened for intimate partner violence in the doctor's office, something is supposed to happen next if you say yes, right? So, or somebody's supposed to be encouraging you or having conversations with about these things. So I just can't emphasize enough what a privilege it is to be around. We also have to make a distinction between intimate partner violence, sex work, and human trafficking, which are different buckets, right? And sometimes terms are used interchangeably, and they're really different entities with different power dynamics, I think, is really what it comes down to if we're going to distinguish between kind of these different areas. I think one of the biggest challenges for street medicine teams is that many of the tools that have been written to support a clinical team say, I went through some training to learn how to talk to people about safety and how to prepare a safety, like do a safety plan with somebody who's in a violent relationships. And a lot of those instructions don't make any sense if you're living under a bridge or in a tent. You can't stash a go bag somewhere. You don't have copies of your documents, these kinds of things that make a lot of sense, just not for the folks on the street. And so I think this is part of what we're trying to explore is how would we make culturally relevant tools that street medicine teams, people on the street who are in these situations could utilize in a way that makes sense.
I'm going to go back in something you said that I think for our audience, you talked about the different characteristics of the different buckets of be it trafficking, sex work, etc. Can you kind of define the terms, like the different buckets? Just walk our listeners through that.
Sure. So intimate partner violence, which formerly was called domestic violence, and the name changed some years ago. But all that to say that this is a relationship in which there's close, intimate feelings and there's violence between those folks. They can be of any socioeconomic status, any gender identity, any of the kind of characteristics. It's really non-discriminatory in that way. The power dynamic is in favor of the person who is abusing the other person, right? And so there is this power play and ultimately a feeling of powerlessness on behalf of the person who's the victim of the intimate partner violence. Sex work is a choice that is made by one's own self, and the terms in which sex is bought or is somehow compensated for is a negotiation between the person who's engaging in sex work and the person who is purchasing a service. And so there are no external dynamic pressures to make a certain amount of money or with a certain group of people or in a certain area, right? So it's quite like autonomous in terms of the two parties coming together. In the last bucket of human trafficking, there is a trafficker who is placing the demands upon this other person, and failure to sort of comply with those demands results in physical or psychological or some combination of tactics in which to keep that person doing the things that are being demanded of them. And the consequences are often quite severe. But the person who's being trafficked is not calling the shots. They're not, receiving compensation. This is really the opposite in many ways in terms of their autonomy.
Corinne, I'm going to ask you to tell us some stories. Okay. You've got a wealth of patient and experiences and interactions. Go into your memory banks and pull out at least a couple people where an intervention was made that was successful. Can you do that? Mm-hmm. Can you bring to life some real world hands-on? This is what was happening. This is what we did. This was the result.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the dynamics of those stories were really similar, whether it was somebody who is being trafficked or somebody who is in, a dangerous relationship. And what I've heard directly from, and in this case, it was, women that I'm thinking of, but certainly doesn't have to be. We know that to be true. They had been in violent relationships for a very long time and had awareness, right? They knew this wasn't a healthy relationship. They knew that this wasn't an environment that they wanted to stay in, but they felt that they, particularly being a woman outside in LA, potentially by yourself, right? You stick with the devil, is something we often hear in some iteration, right, on the street. And what we hear from people who have left, whether it was a trafficker, because on either end, if it's IPV or if it's human trafficking, the victim needs to be ready to be a survivor, right? They need to be ready on their terms, and we cannot force those terms and we cannot cheerlead them into those terms or into that moment. But what we can be is a constant companion for when that moment is right. And so I had, one person in particular that I'm thinking of who had a range of, physical disability, was very dependent on this other person who was really exploitative in many ways. And when she decided she wanted to leave, they'd actually gotten housed together. And I came to see her one day and she said, he's stealing my money and he's not nice to me. And I just want to have a better life for me and my cat. That's my priority. And I always thought I'd have to do it alone. And I just didn't think I could ever do that. But now I know the street medicine team is not going to leave and I won't be alone. And that has changed the trajectory of her and many women who've really come to that same conclusion. And listen, it's really hard to do something hard alone. It doesn't matter what it is in your life. And so if you feel like there's a team that's going to be like there for you, that's a tremendous amount of trust to place in someone else when many, many people have let you down. But I do feel that that's been the common denominator, is feeling like they weren't going to have to do this alone, and we weren't going to abandon them as soon as they separated. And listen, like, I continued seeing both of these folks on my census and took care of them separately and held those professional boundaries and lines. It didn't have to be that somebody lost their health care because somebody else decided this relationship wasn't right for them.
Tell us about the risks of inserting ourselves into these dynamics. I'm just curious about this, that you've got a perpetrator of intimate partner violence, or you've got a trafficker who's, sometimes out on the street, they're right there, keeping an eye on who might be our patient who is coming to us for STI test, etc. I'm just wondering, what are your safety protocols for navigating that potential for violence?
Yeah. I mean, we can't be naive, right, to these things. So I'm going to separate IPV and trafficking, because I think the dynamics there's a couple of things to think about if it's a human trafficking situation that may not play in the same way as IPV. I think when it comes to human trafficking, traffickers view this person that is your patient, right, as property. And that's really the business model of human trafficking, is that the item, the property that's being distributed, is a person. And so in a sense, when you are removing that person, you are removing a moneymaker. You are removing somebody who makes that trafficker a startling amount of money. And that changes people's view of you. So I think there are real serious things to consider. I think it depends on if you need to come back to that encampment. This is one of the decision trees pieces that we think about on our teams is this an encampment where we have a lot of other patients? And if this person is removed for some reason that is linked back to us, do we need to be able to come back to this encampment? And if so, how are we going to do that? I think our team is always very upfront that we still have the same laws that we abide by and the same rules and professional and ethical standards, even if we're treating 7 people in the same encampment. And so because we are kind with those boundaries, but they know that we uphold them, when we're pressed for information, let's say we needed to come back to a place, if we're pressed for information, they understand that we cannot and will not share, just like we wouldn't for them if something happened to them. But in many cases, when there's been human trafficking and that person has left that trafficking situation, many times it's a place we are not going back to, or perhaps we need to coordinate with another team that's going to go in and provide some services because we need a cool off period. It just really depends on the dynamic. And of course, where is that person going to go and how ready are they? We've had many people leave situations, and I'm sure any listener who's been in the middle of these sorts of situations has helped somebody flee a situation, whether it's IPV or trafficking, and that individual actually calls and lets other people know where they are. So there isn't anonymity. And I'm not blaming them in any way. They just weren't ready, right, to leave. And so in street medicine, we're really good about their goals, not our goals, but we really have to mean it in these situations because they are ultimately at the highest risk.
You were going to draw a distinction between trafficking and IPV, and what's the distinction there with safety with IPV?
Yeah, so I think IPV can be just as dangerous. I just think the money dynamic is very different in a kind of typical IPV relationship. Now on the street, sometimes there is a piece where, say, you've been sharing your food stamps or you've been panhandling together to make ends meet. But I find that it's not as severe as when you're dealing with like somebody who's trafficking and being trafficked.
Because of the money in the middle. Yeah. Okay. Corinne, this has been helpful. I'm going to just give you an opportunity to say more. Just in what advice would you give to street medicine teams around the country, around the world when dealing with these issues? What would be just like some basic advice that you would give us?
I think that our patients who have been gracious enough to let us into their lives are typically better with us than without us. And I say that because sometimes we get so discouraged. We're trying to move mountains. We're trying to move a pebble that feels feels like a mountain, and we become discouraged at a range of things, including how ill-equipped our systems are to receive people who have been in violent relationships, how frustrating it is to do intakes all day long for a DV shelter only to get denied at the end. I mean, there are real moments in time, and I've had them myself, where I'm like, what am I doing here? And am I helping in any way? And I just think of those stories that I shared about women who told me they would never have left if it had not been for a street medicine team that they trusted would show up for them when everybody else doesn't. And so even when you feel like you are making no progress, I think we're just better together. And if we stick together, we will eventually figure this out.
And so often in this podcast, my guests come back to that human relationship, community, solidarity. You know, it's just foundational for this work that we're doing, and you're raising it up one more time, and I thank you for that.
It's foundational for us to survive a human experience, right? It really is. We just got to stick together.
Yeah, it's important to recognize that we're all addicted and we're all traumatized. No one escapes unscathed. Corinne, I've got two last questions. Okay. The first one is going to be, what question didn't I ask? What question would you like to answer?
There's a humanitarian in India named Harsh Mander, and probably more than 10 years ago now, he said in a conference that a failure of empathy is a failure of our imagination. And it's a principle that I teach off of routinely when I'm teaching about street medicine, because when we're having moments when we feel like we're having a hard time connecting to somebody who feels very different from us, or their background, for whatever reason we think that we're having a hard time connecting, I just ask you to examine your own imagination, because I think we fail all the time with the limits of our imagination. This is why doing ride-alongs with the street medicine team is so powerful. People know that it changed their lives, or they say to us, I feel like I can never unsee it, right? And I see the world differently. What do they mean by that? It means that the lid was blown wide open off of their imagination. And now they're faced with a series of questions that they can't answer, because now they've got new stuff in there. And I just ask you listeners and folks who are interested in street medicine to continue that curiosity. We often will blame other people for our own inadequacy. And in this case, the failure of our imagination gets blamed on another person, and just pondering how unfair that is.
Thank you. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I'm going to put in a quick plug that Harsh was one of our first interviews. Yeah, back when we interviewed Brett, your husband. Final question. Mm-hmm. If you could do one thing to make the world a better place, what would it be?
Fall in love with each other. Fall in love with each other. This situation, which could be defined in a lot of different ways, when I look at it, I just see a lot of people who have fallen out of love with each other. Humanity has fallen out of love with each other. And that in some ways, I feel street medicine's role for our patients, but also for our healthcare systems and our communities, is a reminder that it's actually okay to fall in love with each other again, and try to figure out a way together.
That's absolutely stunning and beautiful. Thank you. I think we're gonna end on that note. Fall in love with each other. Corinne, thank you for your time. Thank you for being on Streetside.
Appreciate having me, and I look forward to a line of T-shirts that we can develop together.
Great. We'll be selling them at the symposium in September. Yeah. Okay. Have a blessed day.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
The Street Medicine Institute is a secular, nonpartisan organization. Any spiritual or political views shared by guests on Streetside are their own. They're offered in the spirit of conversation and should not be taken as reflecting the views or positions of the Street Medicine Institute. This podcast should not be used for personal medical guidance. Please consult your healthcare provider.